Why ancient Roman gladiators? Had it worse than you think. When we think of ancient Roman gladiators, we often picture brave warriors fighting in grand arenas, like the Colosseum, cheered by roaring crowds. Movies and TV shows make their lives seem thrilling, even heroic. But the reality was far darker. Gladiators lived brutal, short, and often miserable lives. They faced constant danger, harsh conditions, and little freedom. This history dives into why being a gladiator was much worse than most people imagine, exploring their origins, daily struggles, brutal fights, and the grim truth behind their fame. Who were the gladiators? Gladiators were fighters in ancient Rome, from around 264 BCE to the early 400s CE, who battled in public arenas for entertainment. They weren't usually free citizens living glamorous lives. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals, forced into the role. Some were poor men who volunteered, hoping for fame or money. But this was rare. Slaves and prisoners. Rome's empire conquered many lands, and captured people were often turned into gladiators. These included soldiers from defeated armies, like those from Gaul or Carthage, or people enslaved for debts or crimes. Criminals. Those sentenced to death could be sent to the arena instead, forced to fight as a public punishment. Volunteers. A few free men chose to become gladiators, lured by the chance of glory or to escape poverty. But even they lost their freedom, signing contracts that bound them to a master. Gladiators were seen as the lowest of the low in Roman society. They had no rights, were owned by their masters, called lanistae, and were treated more like property than people. The origins of gladiator fights began as part of funeral rituals in early Rome, around the 3rd century BCE. Wealthy families staged battles to honor the dead, believing bloodshed pleased their spirits. Over time, these fights grew into massive public spectacles, especially during the Roman Republic and Empire, 509 BCE 476 CE. Politicians used them to win favor with the public, hosting huge events to show off their wealth and power. By the time of the Roman Empire, gladiator games, munera, were held in massive arenas like the Colosseum, which could seat 50,000 people. These events weren't just fights. They included animal hunts, executions, and even mock battles. The games became a way to keep the Roman people entertained and distracted from problems like poverty or political unrest. Training and life in the ludus gladiators lived in training schools called ludi, singular ludus, which were like prisons, crossed with military camps. Life there was strict and grueling. Training was intense. Gladiators practiced daily with weapons like swords, shields, or tridents, depending on their fighting style. They used wooden weapons for practice, to avoid injury, but trainers were harsh, using whips to enforce discipline. Each gladiator was trained to fight as a specific type, like Murmillo, wore a helmet with a fish-shaped crest, carried a large shield, and used a short sword. Retiarius fought with a net, trident, and dagger, wearing little armor for speed. Thryax used a curved sword and small shield, styled after Thracian warriors. Training made them strong, but it was also dangerous. Injuries were common, and poor medical care meant many died from infections or untreated wounds. Living conditions. The ludus was no luxury. Gladiators slept in small, cramped cells, often chained to prevent escape. Food was basic, but designed to keep them strong: barley porridge, beans, and sometimes meat. This diet earned them the nickname barley men. While they ate better than some slaves, it wasn't for their benefit. It was to make them better fighters. Gladiators had little freedom. They were watched constantly, and punishments for disobedience were brutal, sometimes deadly. Even volunteers who signed up lost their rights, becoming little more than slaves. The brutality of the arena. The arena was where gladiators faced their darkest moments. Fights were not just entertainment. They were life-or-death struggles. Types of fights. Gladiators fought in different formats. One-on-one. Two gladiators battled until one surrendered, was wounded, or died. Group battles. Teams of gladiators fought, sometimes recreating famous battles. Against animals. Gladiators faced lions, bears, or other wild beasts in deadly hunts. Not every fight ended in death, but many did. The crowd and the event's sponsor, often a politician or emperor, decided a defeated gladiator's fate. If the loser fought bravely, the crowd might spare them by waving handkerchiefs. If not, they signaled death with a thumbs-down gesture. Odds of survival. While some gladiators became famous and survived many fights, most weren't so lucky. Historians estimate that about 1 in 10 fights ended in death, but injuries were common, and many died later from wounds or infections. Even skilled gladiators rarely lived past their 20s or 30s. The constant threat of death hung over them, making every fight a gamble. The spectacle. The games were bloody but carefully staged. Gladiators entered the arena to music, wearing colorful armor to excite the crowd. Arenas were filled with dramatic effects, trapdoors, fake blood, or even flooded stages for mock naval battles. But behind the spectacle was real suffering. Gladiators fought, knowing they might not walk out alive. The hidden horrors beyond the arena. Gladiators faced horrors most people don't think about. Physical toll fighting took a brutal toll on their bodies. Broken bones, deep cuts, and concussions were common. Medical care was basic. Doctors stitched wounds or set bones. But without modern medicine, infections were deadly. Some gladiators were left crippled, unable to fight or work, and were abandoned by their masters. Mental strain. The mental burden was just as heavy. Gladiators lived with constant fear, knowing each fight could be their last. They trained alongside men they might have to kill later, forming bonds that made fights even harder. Many turned to superstitions, like charms or prayers, to cope with the stress. Social stigma. Despite their fame, gladiators were outcasts. Roman society admired their bravery, but despised them as infames, disgraced people, ranking them with actors and prostitutes. They couldn't vote, marry freely, or join normal society. Even successful gladiators who won their freedom struggled to escape this stigma. Exploitation. Gladiators were tools for profit. Their masters, the Lanistae, made money by renting them out or betting on fights. Some gladiators were forced to fight more often to increase profits, raising their risk of death. Women gladiators, though rare, faced extra exploitation, sometimes used for entertainment beyond fighting. The gladiators. Some gladiators became celebrities, especially those who survived many fights. Fans cheered their names, and their images appeared on coins, lamps, or graffiti. Successful gladiators could win prizes like money, fame, or even freedom. A wooden sword called a rudis symbolized freedom. But this fame came at a cost. They were still slaves, owned by their masters, and their popularity only increased the pressure to keep fighting. A few gladiators, like Spartacus, became legends. Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator, led a massive slave rebellion, 73 to 71 BCE, against Rome. While his story is inspiring, most gladiators didn't have such power. They were trapped in a system that used them until they broke. Why it was worse. Then you think movies often show gladiators as heroic figures with a shot at glory. But the truth was grimmer. No choice. Most gladiators were forced into the role, with no way out except death or rare freedom. Constant danger. Even training could be deadly, and the arena was a gamble with terrible odds. No respect. Society saw them as disposable, despite their fame. Short lives, few lived long enough to enjoy any rewards, dying young from wounds or exhaustion. Mental anguish. The fear of death and the need to kill friends or rivals haunted them. The gladiator's life wasn't just about fighting, it was about surviving. A system designed to exploit and destroy them. The end of the gladiator games by the 300s CE, the games began to decline. Several factors contributed. Christianity's rise, the Christian Church, which became Rome's official religion in 380 CE, opposed the violence of the games, calling them sinful. Economic troubles. Rome's empire faced invasions and money problems, making it harder to fund expensive spectacles. Changing tastes. Romans began preferring other entertainments, like chariot races. In 404 CE, Emperor Honorius banned gladiator fights, though some continued in smaller arenas for a while. By the 5th century, the games were mostly gone, ending a brutal tradition. The legacy of gladiators. The gladiator games left a lasting mark. They showed Rome's love for spectacle, but also its cruelty. Today, we romanticize gladiators in films, like Gladiator, but the real story is one of suffering, not triumph. Their lives remind us how power and entertainment can exploit the vulnerable. Archaeologists have found gladiator graves, weapons, and arenas, giving us clues about their world. Inscriptions and graffiti tell of their victories and losses, humanizing these forgotten fighters. Their story is a warning about the cost of treating people as objects for amusement. Health and medical nightmares. Gladiators' bodies were pushed to extremes, leading to chronic health problems that shortened lives dramatically. Training involved hours of sparring, weightlifting with heavy stones, and endurance runs, often on hard-packed dirt that caused joint damage. In the arena, weapons like the gladius, short sword, inflicted deep lacerations, while helmets and shields led to concussions. Modern studies of gladiator skeletons show signs of repeated head trauma. Similar to boxers today, infections were a silent killer. Wounds from fights or training were cleaned with vinegar or wine. But without antibiotics, even minor cuts could fester. A study of remains from Ephesus, modern Turkey, revealed that gladiators had high rates of healed fractures and arthritis from repetitive stress. Their high-protein, barley-heavy diet, up to 5,000 calories daily, built muscle, but also caused digestive issues and strontium buildup in bones, indicating frequent injuries needing mineral-rich recovery foods. Despite this, life expectancy was low. Most died before 30, often from sepsis or organ failure rather than arena deaths alone. Parasites and diseases plagued the ludi. Crowded barracks spread illnesses like tuberculosis, and some gladiators were deliberately infected with animal parasites during bestiari, animal fights, preparations, weakening them further. Emperors like Caligula reportedly poisoned gladiators' food to rig outcomes, adding betrayal to their woes, psychological torment, and camaraderie. The mental strain was immense, often overlooked in popular depictions. Gladiators formed tight bonds, in the ludi, like a twisted family. But this made killing comrades heartbreaking. Diaries and inscriptions, such as those from Pompey's graffiti, show gladiators mourning fallen friends. Crescens, the retiarius, lies here, defeated by fate. Many suffered from what we'd call PTSD, nightmares of blood-soaked sands and roaring crowds. To cope, some turned to religion, dedicating offerings to gods like Nemesis, goddess of revenge, or Mercury, psychopomp for the dead. Superstitions abounded, touching a fallen foe's shield for luck, or avoiding black cats. Desertion was rare, but punishable by crucifixion, heightening paranoia. Volunteers, like the poet Martial described, entered seeking glory, but often regretted it, trapped by contracts lasting until manumission, freedom, or death. Women gladiators, gladiatrices, faced double stigma. Though rare, banned by Emperor Septimius Severus in 200 CE, they fought in mixed or all-female bouts, often nude for titillation. Sources like Dio Cassius describe them as novelties, but their lives mirrored men's enslavement, training scars, and societal scorn as shameless for defying gender norms. Paths to freedom. Rare and rigged freedom, rudis, was the ultimate prize, but elusive. A gladiator needed to win enough fights, typically 20-30, to petition their lanista. Emperors like Claudius granted it liberally for PR, but many masters delayed to maximize profits. Freed gladiators became freedmen, but stigma lingered. They couldn't hold office and often became trainers or bodyguards. Spartacus's rebellion, 73-71 BCE, highlights the desperation. A former Thracian soldier enslaved after deserting Roman ranks, he escaped with 70 others, amassing 120,000 slaves. They defeated legions but were crushed at Lucania. 6,000 crucifixes lined the Appian Way as warning. This event exposed the system's rot, yet gladiator numbers grew. Trajan's Dacian Wars, 101-106 CE, featured 10,000 fights to celebrate. Archaeological evidence. Bones tell the tale, dig sites reveal the unglamorous truth. At the Ephesus Gladiator Cemetery, 2nd century CE, 68 skeletons showed 85% with healed weapon wounds, arrowheads embedded in bones, sword gashes on arms. Isotope analysis confirms their barley man diet, high strontium from plants, low animal protein despite meat rations. The Colosseum's underbelly, hypogeum, tunnels for beasts and fighters, unearthed chains, graffiti. We who are about to die salute you. And medical tools like bone saws. London's Gladiator mosaic from the British Museum depicts defeated fighters begging mercy, their eyes wide with terror. These artifacts humanize them, not invincible heroes, but scarred survivors. Venations, animal hunts, added horror. Gladiators faced starved lions or elephants, with 11,000 beasts killed in Trajan's games alone. Damascus steel-like weapons sometimes failed, leading to maulings. Juvenal's satires mock the crowd's bloodlust, cheering as men were torn apart, societal. And economic exploitation gladiators fueled Rome's economy, but saw little gain. Lanisti charged high fees to sponsor games, up to 50,000 sesterces per fighter. Emperors bankrupted treasuries on spectacles. Domitian built a wooden arena for nightly fights. Caligula forced senators to fight. Corruption was rife. Bribed outcomes ensured favorites won, dooming underdogs. Socially, they were eroticized yet reviled. Wealthy women reportedly visited Ludi for liaisons, as in Juvenal's poems, but gladiators risked punishment for fraternizing. Their fame spawned merchandise, figurines, amulets, but profits went to owners. Comparisons to modern analogies, think of gladiators like extreme athletes in exploitative systems, boxers in rigged fights, or soldiers in endless wars. Unlike NFL players with unions and health care, gladiators had no recourse. Their "worse than you think" stems from total dehumanization. No consent, no escape, constant commodification. Decline in detail. Christian influence and beyond Christianity's hybrid pontis, opposition grew post-Constantine 312 CE. Saints like Telemachus intervened in arenas, martyred for protesting. Economic strain from barbarian invasions diverted funds. The last recorded fight was in 435 CE under Valentinian III. Byzantine records show lingering games, but violence waned.